And I think as a company, you kind of want to be in that position where you are pushing those boundaries. You are trying to see what you can do and what you can accomplish. When I was at AppSart and I was doing the post presentation for QbMobile, I had so many people coming up to me and just astonished with where we're going from, Qbtech and Qbcheck, and now they're looking at doing it on a mobile device. So they're so interested and intrigued with what our next thing is going to be. So I think by pushing those boundaries, we open those doors to getting more people involved or getting more people on board and wanting to see what we are able to accomplish.
So let's stick on that QbMobile for a minute, because I think that is, innovation and research coming together. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Sure. So with QbMobile is basically taking its QB test, and we're doing the exact same thing, but you're doing it on a mobile device. It's the same concept as far as the go, no go for those age 6 to 11. And then for 12 to 6, it's the one back task. Nothing changes with the test and the format at all. What does change is that it utilizes the camera built in on the cell phone, so you don't have to wear the reflector marker on the forehead. And then the responses are recorded by just simply tapping the screen with your thumb.
You did say you presented on some poster data recently. Mm-hmm. What were some of the findings in the research thus far?
The findings was that it's very accepted by the test takers. It was 95% accepted from those that were surveyed about how the test was easy to use, that there was not a lot of issues or complications while taking the test. We also were able to discover and find that a lot of the parameters or basic parameters within QbMobile align with Qbtech themselves. We weren't expecting them to be, of course, perfect, because you're actually taking a phone on a mobile device instead of, the Qbtech, which is more of a handheld clicker. But all in all, that they did align fairly well with the parameters within Qbtech.
That's so exciting. And I think the 95% acceptability, we're talking about, people with ADHD and doing something on their phone. So I think that user experience and acceptance is really important to be able to gather. Anything else you'd add on that, Ragini?
I would say that being able to move the objective assessment that was developed, so many years ago from, the hardware to the software to now application version on a mobile device that's accessible now to so many people. It is the next step in integrating, like we talked about, integrating changes in improvement for the whole patient journey. And I think, like you said, patients with ADHD and on their phones, we already know that that's kind of a tricky situation, right? So I feel like in this way, we're also going to be able to capture so much informative data that will help us better understand ADHD, as well as how is this patient doing on their journey of treatment, but also as a whole, what are we seeing in ADHD? What are their trends, especially in this day and age of, I think overstimulation, constant overstimulation, right? We're having information input all the time, and it would be an interesting thing to be able to collect data and just see trends generally.
So we've just tested our 1 millionth patient, which is really exciting. And I think, we've been able to do that through the hardware and the software, like you've both mentioned. And the mobile application has incredible opportunities. When it comes to having access to the data from 1 million patients, where do you think that leaves us at Qbtech versus other technologies that might be just coming onto market, and what does that mean for behavioral health and ADHD in general?
Having such a large collection of that data, it really allows, and I'd like to give a shout out to our data scientists, because the work they do is impeccable. What they're able to do with the data and go in and analyze it, they are able to kind of take us down paths that we weren't or didn't even know that we could go down. And so having a large collection of that data, it just gives you so many, it's kind of like we were talking about earlier, having that evidence and be able to go through it and see, and then maybe it's taking sometimes our data scientists down a whole path they weren't even aware that they were going to go down. just by analyzing it. So it's just nice to have a big pool of that data as well.
And I think that's a good example of kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier of how research will inform innovation, right? You're collecting such a large pool of data, right? And we're collecting all these different variables where we start out with an objective, with a hypothesis, right? And as we kind of follow that rabbit down the hole, we may end up discovering a lot more than we intentionally set out to. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about research is the knowledge, the power in knowledge, right? And the better informed you are, the better your understanding of it is. And so having such a large database compared to some of these other products or assessments that are starting out or have a smaller or maybe not so global database, right? Kind of sets the standard, I think, for us and for, the world of ADHD assessments, right? Because we're able to say this is not just based on 5,000 patients or 10,000 patients. It is not just based on, Americans. It's not just based on, Europeans, but the fact that we are global. We've collected so much data, and we can then better inform our clinicians on what they're looking at when they're seeing the results from our assessments. And I think, that's a really beautiful thing we can do.
I couldn't agree more. I think that is one of the things that's really unique about Qbtech is that we are clinician focused and not necessarily product or research led, but that we have a very holistic view on using data, using clinical experience, using patient experience to help inform, and the data scientist team versus the research team and the clinical support team to take all of those insights and to help to motivate and move our products forward, that we're not just taking one input, but we're taking many to really lead in the innovation front. So
I would just say, I think also it's really interesting to that the clinical data that you talked about, we were collecting not just with our research studies, but just clinically, being able to observe that data and see how it's been used in different ways to help inform the clinicians, but not just inform the clinicians also. I know we've also used that to help inform us about different policies, how we can help to influence or inform different governing bodies or, insurance policies or healthcare providers, what they could be utilizing these tools for, right? And what is the value behind it and what we can bring to the table to help work within a lot of the regulations that need to be there in the medical world, right? And I think that's another part of innovation, being able to use this tool in a way that can better inform not just the clinicians and not just the patients, but also at a policy level.